In the mid-1980s, comic books were in a slump. Sales were down and people were becoming less interested in superheroes. Alan Moore was part of a new wave of comic writers who helped reinvent the comic book and help it become the graphic novel. He helped revolutionise the comic industry with the Swamp Thing saga, and then the groundbreaking Watchmen. Along with these, the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman invited people to look on the graphic novel, not as a comic book, but a form of high literature. I asked Stephen Price, journalist, novelist and lecturer at the Causeway Institute, about what it is about Gaiman's work that's so different to comics that had come before.
What he did was he actually used characters and themes from the great plays and from the great dramatists that are traditionally acknowledged as being important in particularly English literature. In fact, quite a lot of the Sandman characters are actually drawn directly from Shakespearean plays. Now, whereas beforehand comic book writers would have been quite happy to have stolen from other parts of literature and turned their characters into, if you like, kind of like supervillains or superheroes. What Gaiman actually did was use the characters directly without changing him, thereby, if you like, acknowledging the debt that he as a writer has to these classics and creating a definite link between his work and these classics themselves. You could argue that the Sandman series is as satisfying a read from a literary, from an artistic perspective as a Shakespeare play, which indeed I would argue that it is, and they are. This has to do with the universal question that's been asked for many centuries: what is art? What constitutes art? And it's quite often the case with new artistic movements, say for example Dadaism, Surrealism in the 1920s and the 1930s, Modernism in the 1930s and the 1940s. When new artistic movements come out, they are quite often derided by the artistic establishment that already exists as being in some way inferior, usually because they're new and because they bring new ideas to the fore. Also, if a genre has its roots in popular culture, this, generally speaking, does very little to get it accepted as high art. However, anybody who knows anything about the history of, say, for example, rock music will know that after many decades of rock music being disregarded by the critics as entertainment for the masses, it's now written, the critics write about rock music with the same veneration as they write about, say, for example, an art exhibition in a gallery or all the rest. So you can see that there is, if you like, a kind of like an elevation going on even in popular culture, things like, you know, music, film, television, all the rest. Well, comics and graphic novels have the same history. For many decades, when they first started coming out in the 1940s, 1950s, even 1960s, were seen as trash, were seen as, if you like, low art, even though an awful lot of the artwork in the comics was extremely good. And an awful lot of the storylines were also extremely good, but there would still be a tendency to frown upon it, to look down upon it, and to dismiss it as trashy pop culture. I firmly believe that Gaiman, if you like, was the sort of the watershed for critics, and for the first time when the Sandman novels come out, you have high art critics saying, thank God we now have comics and graphic novels that we can stand over and say, yes, this is high art, this deserves elevation. But of course, in the culture that we live in, consensus is created by how things are viewed by the majority. And the majority view prior to Sandman would have been that comics and graphic novels are not high art. Now the majority view after Sandman is that they can be high art.
It was books like Sandman and Hellblazer that paved the way for the Vertigo imprint at DC. It continues today as such titles as Y the Last Man, 100 Bullets and Fables. In recent years, comic books have become more focused in the eye of the mainstream media, thanks in no small part to the X-Men movie franchise, which helped revive the comic book subgenre. I asked Andy Given, media student and film fan, why these have become popular.
Since the late 90s to now, Hollywood hasn't really got an original idea in their little heads, so they've turned to adapting graphic novels and comic books. They've drafted them in to make like kids films, so the kids will go to the cinema with their parents and they'll bring a lot of revenue in for the studios, and it's just a quick and easy way to make money without having to think too hard.
And what do you think has been the most faithful adaptation so far?
For looks, the way the film looked compared to the graphic novel or the comic book would probably be Sin City, because it was all just panel for panel, shot for shot, because Rodriguez was such a big fan of Miller's work that he just decided that the best way to do it would be to just recreate the comic book in a different medium. For just general storyline, I would have to say either X-Men 2 or Hellboy. Just the guys who directed the films were such big fans of either, like for Bryan Singer, he was such a big fan of the X-Men, and for Guillermo del Toro, he was such a big fan of Hellboy that he had to do it right. If he'd have done it wrong, there wouldn't have been any point. So they had to look spot on, they had to look good, and Hellboy looked class.
Really?
Why do you think comic book films have become popular?
The studios said, right, we're going to make something cool, something that the kids will look at and they'll say, right, that's class. I want to be him.
You know that look cool.
And because they want to be him, they'll go and they'll buy all the other merchandise, like the posters and the t-shirts and the lunch boxes and the pencil cases and whatnot. And it's a quick and easy way for the studio to make a buck. They should be appreciating the medium a lot more, but then there are some people out there who like for example, like Singer or Del Toro or Robert Rodriguez or Frank Miller, who have a love for the graphic novel medium and do it right. And whenever you watch the films, you can really tell that. You can tell that these guys grew up with the books and really do love them, and that's what it's all about.
I suppose that the main point to get across here is that even with good instincts, the life of a crime fighter takes a small adjustment period.
So what is it about the superhero archetype that is appealing?
Well, who doesn't want to be Spider-Man? I'd love to be Spider-Man, I think it'd be class. But that is the main hook on what makes superhero films so popular, is that you go into the cinema, you watch Spider-Man for 2 hours, you come out of the cinema and you want to be Spider-Man. You want to go and fight a radioactive spider to bite you so you can become Spider-Man. And like Wolverine as well, Wolverine's a cool bastard. He's just the lad, and who doesn't want to be Wolverine? It's the way it works. You make the film a PG or a 12, kids go in and watch the film, and because they emulate these characters so much that they'll go out and they'll buy everything to do with the films, all the merchandise and stuff. And then it's also a good way to get money for like Marvel or for DC or whatnot, because then the kids will go out and they'll start buying the comic books, which is actually pretty good, because it's a good way to get kids into comic books, which is almost now it's a forgotten medium. There isn't many people out there that still respect the comic book, but since these films are being made and you've got like Fantastic Four and you've got X-Men and stuff, people will go out and they'll start buying the comic books again, and it's a good way to get people back into them.
Is there anything else?
Well, thanks very much, Andy.
Cheers, big ears.